Hi, everybody, and welcome to An Orthodox Priest Reacts to The Chosen. Now, I've chosen The Chosen because our audience has been asking that we do an Orthodox reaction to this series. Now, there's really not a lot of good Christian material out there, and so I wanted to do The Chosen because I've seen some really great things there. And again, this is not meant to be a massive theological treatise on The Chosen and everything that happens. I just wanted to make a couple of comments and some guidance as we go through this series. Now, I know that there's a pilot episode called The Shepherd, but it seems only appropriate to do that at Christmas time, so we're going to wait for that. And we also are going to be reviewing newer episodes as they come out. But today, we're going to go ahead and start with episode 1, I Have Called You by Name. Now, right at the beginning, they give a great introduction, which tells us that The Chosen is the story of Christ, but it's also the story of the apostles. And that's one of the things I really love about this series. Now, I get it that with every movie, there's always going to be some things where poetic license is taken. And we're going to see some of those things, and I don't want to get overly strict on those. In fact, they even mention that some of the timelines have been adjusted so that they can bring the content forward. And what's really important for us is that we understand the message of who Jesus Christ is and who his disciples were. So one of the things first off that I want to say is I really like the way that they, in the beginning of the episode, they go back to the Old Testament to provide you some context with the characters as they move forward in time to Jesus' time. So in this episode, they begin with Mary Magdalene as a small child and how her parents are rearing her up in the study of the scripture at that time. And then they fast forward to her very difficult situation. So what it does is it gives us context that we don't really have a lot of times. So here we see Nicodemus interacting with the Roman soldiers. And I really like the way that they did that because it portrays the connection that the Jewish leadership had with the Romans, but at the same time, the struggle that they had because of what Rome wanted them to do and what was right for them to do. So especially here, it portrays Nicodemus very close to what we think he was in actual scripture. So now we're moving on to introducing the apostles, and we start off with Matthew. And I thought here they also did a very good job. Now, I'm not quite sure why they made Matthew autistic. There's nothing in the Gospels to suggest that. But again, they did say at the beginning that there was going to be some creative liberty with how the characters are portrayed. So I don't think that that's a very big thing. I'd like to talk a little bit now about the setting overall. Now, in this setting where Nicodemus is talking to the rabbis, this is done very well. When you look at how Nicodemus is outfitted, his gesturing, the fact that he's sitting in the teaching chair, you see the incense in the back, okay? He's not in a synagogue, I understand that, but still, he could have been outdoors. And this matches very well with some of the other settings of the Roman soldiers and of the people that we've seen in previous settings of this episode. So I think that's something that they've done really well. Also, the characters are very relaxed. So it's not like a Shakespearean play where they're, and I am saying that. So they look very relaxed and as they would at that particular time and at that particular setting. Now, I really love this scene. Again, it's another interaction with Nicodemus and the rabbis. And this is a picture that could be taken today with a bishop visiting his church, because Nicodemus comes in and he's greeted by the rabbis, which in this case, Nicodemus would be, let's say, our bishop, and then you'd see the priest there, and there'd be a collection of senior priests, but then the really young ones who are really nervous, and you see Nicodemus come in, and he's greeted by the priest, we're so glad to have you here, and then Nicodemus makes a joke, but then everybody all of a sudden gets nervous, and then he says, relax, it's just a joke. So that interaction could just happen today. I've seen it many, many times, and I just had fun with that. Now, here's a great scene to show the interaction between the Jewish leaders and the Romans, really showing that the Romans are in charge, because the Roman soldier comes in on orders from the prefect that says, you're going to go to the Red Quarter and you're going to take care of this problem. And Nicodemus responds by saying, well, that's not really what we do. And the Romans now come back and say, you do what we're going to tell you to do, or we'll just burn the place down. So what we really see here is the true relationship between the Jewish leadership and the Romans. All right, great, great fight scene. Now we're getting introduced to Peter and to Andrew. So we're getting to see that relationship. Now, nowhere in the gospel does it talk about this fight that Peter was having. But what it does is it introduces the character of Peter, the zeal, the hot temper that is in the gospel. The only thing I guess I would comment here is that they show him kind of as a con man. I can see Peter getting into fights for sure, but being the con man, I mean, we don't want to show Peter as Jack Sparrow, let's say. What a great use of an Orthodox censor. I mean, clearly there must have been an Orthodox church there, and that's where they got the censor. I've never seen that in any Jewish synagogue, let's say. But the depiction of the exorcism overall, I think, was okay. Exorcism was definitely established at the time of Christ within Judaism. So that part is technically correct. However, normally speaking, there would have been an exorcist that would have performed that, someone who was trained in that art. Just like in Orthodoxy, priests do not perform exorcisms. We have somebody who is specialized in that. Above that, typically if an exorcism would be performed, there would typically have to be a minion. So that would be about 10 other rabbis that would be also with him. Now, I know I saw a couple of people in the background, so maybe they were there. The adjudication prayer, I adjure you in the name of, so very historical. That was done very, very well. And I like where Mary Magdalene, obviously possessed, turns to him and you can hear the demon speaking. The only thing that I thought was missing there is typically they would have asked for the name of the demon, because again, the idea that if you capture the name, then you have power over that person. Remember what Jesus did when he exorcised the demons. He asked them, what is your name? And he gained power over them. So that was the only thing I would have liked them to add.
Oh no, they shouldn't cheat you like that when you are also cheating.
Now that's kind of interesting. The interaction that Peter has with his wife, I mean, we see him as this hot-tempered person, but then all of a sudden he seems to be way too modern a husband in terms of how his wife reacts to him and then how he reacts back to his wife. This is almost giving me a big fat Greek wedding kind of hint, because that tone in which they talk to one another, after she would have said a certain number of things against what he was doing, then he just would have shut that down. So I think this took a much more modern tone between how couples are. So here again, we see Mary Magdalene being portrayed as a human being, not what, unfortunately, poor tradition has done to her. If we look in our Synaxarion about Mary Magdalene, the only thing that we find is that she was from the area of Magdalene and that she was pretty young and that she led a sinful life. So there's nothing there to say that absolutely that she was a prostitute. And so what I like about what The Chosen does here is they portray her as a human being so that we can see her as such. And I love this scene where they show her reading the prayer that her father read to her at the beginning of the episode.
Demons. Many. Only God himself could have drawn them out.
Now, here's an excellent point being brought out. And I love the way that what Nicodemus said is going to show up later in what Jesus Christ will say. So he makes this allusion to the fact that there are many demons present. And when there is that many demons, it is something that man cannot do, but God himself will do. And this is exactly what Jesus will do during his ministry.
So I tell him, if he took me straight to Quintus, I'd let them know who caught more in one night than the guy they're arresting catches in a week. Besides, what's the merchant ever done for you? So what? They are our people.
Here, I'm a bit confused because they've again taken license with Peter's character. I mean, we saw him as a fighter, so we saw that hot temper, but then we saw him as a con man, then we saw him as the modern husband, and here we see him almost as a betrayer. You know, I know he kind of tries to make the distinction between, well, they're not our people, they're merchants, but it is very unlikely that at that time, one Jew would have betrayed another, especially during times of occupation. So certainly they would have betrayed the Romans, but they never would have betrayed one another. So I think this carries his character just a little bit too far for me. Unless maybe they're trying to build this up for what will be the ultimate betrayal by the Jews, which is to deliver Jesus up to be then crucified.
I'm sorry, Lilith.
So that's interesting where you hear him use the word Lilith. Now, Lilith does not appear in Scripture. There are some apocryphal books where we have it, and it's associated in Jewish folklore with demons. So Lilith has that connection. Now, that's not a connection in Orthodoxy at all, but I think here in The Chosen, they're making that connection because obviously Mary Magdalene is possessed, and they give that name that is associated in Jewish folklore with demons.
I said leave him.
And there it is. Jesus finally appears. Now, obviously, in later episodes, he's going to appear a lot more, but this is the first time we get to see Jonathan Roumie as his portrayal of Jesus, and I've got to say, this is the classic cinematic portrayal of who we typically believe Jesus to be. Do we know what he really looked like? Of course not. But here they've done a very good job of keeping that cinematic portrayal of him. And his healing of Mary Magdalene, I thought that was very, very well acted. His recital of Old Testament prophecy there, I thought was done very, very well. So we have here clearly a wonderful entrance that starts Jesus' public ministry with her healing. Now, there's a little bit of problem with the chronology here, but again, they told us that in the beginning of the movie, so we don't want to make an overly big deal about that. So that's episode 1. Overall, I think they did a great job of taking what can be a flat perspective from just reading scriptures and bringing things to life and adding that necessary depth to the characters. I feel now that I know Peter a little bit better. I can see myself talking with Matthew, even at the end, seeing how Jesus approached sinners like Mary Magdalene. So I think from an Orthodox perspective, I think it was very well done. Again, I nitpicked a few points here or there, but overall, I think that they did a great job in adding that depth to those characters so that we can more appreciate what it is that not only Jesus did, but who the apostles were. So now, the next episode may not stay so true to the Orthodox faith, but you'll have to wait for that on our next episode of Orthodox Priest Reacts.